So if you were to take a human body and somehow manage to lay its entire outermost layer completely flat on the floor, it would cover, well, basically a standard interior doorway. Just a flat 2 square meter sheet.
Right, which doesn't sound that huge when you put it like that.
Yeah, exactly. But if you were to extract the internal organ responsible for keeping you breathing, the lungs,
Yeah.
and you ironed out all of its microscopic folds and pockets, it would cover an entire tennis court.
It really is a massive difference.
It is. And so today, we are completely rethinking one of the most famous trivia facts printed in pretty much every high school biology textbook on the planet. The claim that your skin is the body's largest organ.
Oh, yeah. It is the ultimate piece of anatomical trivia. It's usually followed by the fact that it accounts for, I think, about 15 to 16% of your total body mass, weighing up to like 4 kilograms.
Right, which sounds incredibly massive until you start challenging what the word size actually means in a biological context.
Exactly.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into the body's largest, or, depending on how you measure it, perhaps second or third largest organ. We're going to unpack the hidden layers of your skin, dismantle some massive myths we've all been taught about the sun, and really just explore the very wrapper that holds you together.
It's a fascinating system.
It really is. And this deep dive is customized specifically for you, the inherently curious learner who wants to get past that surface-level trivia and understand the actual machinery operating your everyday life.
And to start making sense of that machinery, we have to look at how medical science actually classifies this wrapper. The skin makes up the integumentary system.
Integumentary.
Yeah, that term comes from the Latin word integumentum, which basically translates directly to a covering. And as a physical covering, it undeniably holds the record for the largest external boundary of the body.
Just the external part.
Right, that 1.5 to 2 square meters is the metric that secures its famous title.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that title seems to rely on a massive technicality.
Yeah.
Like we are strictly talking about external surface area, the part of the body that physically faces the outside world.
Yeah, that is the fundamental caveat, and it is almost always left out of the classroom.
I certainly don't remember hearing it.
Right, because if you define an organ size by its functional internal surface area, meaning like the total physical area available for cellular exchange with the environment, the skin is completely dwarfed by internal organs.
Wow.
Like you mentioned, the alveolar surface area of human lungs, those tiny microscopic air sacs where oxygen enters the blood, that's estimated to be roughly 70 square meters.
That is just a staggering difference. 2 square meters versus 70.
And some estimates for the lungs go even higher than that. And if you look at the human gut, right, the small intestine is lined with millions of tiny absorptive structures called villi and microvilli.
Oh, right. All those little finger-like things.
Exactly. If you flattened all of those out, the digestive tract's absorptive area is in a similarly massive range.
So the best way I can sort of visualize this is comparing the skin to a flat sheet of wrapping paper. You lay it out on a table, and it covers a very specific, easily measurable flat area.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
But the lungs and the gut are not flat sheets. They're like a highly porous, deeply complex sponge. And if you take that sponge and somehow uncrumpled every single tiny internal fold, the surface area just expands exponentially.
Exactly.
So the skin wins on weight, but it completely loses on functional footprint.
That's a perfect analogy, honestly.
Yeah.
Taking biology textbook facts at face value often obscures the vital context of how the body actually operates.
Yeah, the function matters.
Right. Functionally, the organs packed inside your chest and abdomen have a drastically larger surface area precisely because they need massive amounts of space to absorb oxygen and nutrients. The skin has a smaller surface area because its primary job is the exact opposite. It's meant to act as a barrier.
Well, since that barrier is the part of us that physically touches, the clothes we wear and the air around us, let's zoom in on that very outermost boundary, the epidermis.
From front lines.
Yeah, exactly. How does this outer layer actually stay alive if it's essentially just a wall?
Well, it manages to survive through a rather brutal biological process, to be honest.
Brutal. How so?
So the epidermis is completely avascular. There are 0 blood vessels running through it.
Wait, none?
0.
Yeah.
It's constructed almost entirely of one highly specialized type of cell called a keratinocyte. And these cells undergo this relentless one-way journey.
So they aren't just sitting there like bricks. They're moving.
Oh, constantly. The journey begins in the deepest sublayer of the epidermis, an area called the stratum basale.
Okay, stratum diaz.
Yeah, you can think of it as the nursery. It's the only layer of the epidermis that's close enough to the underlying blood supply to actually receive nutrients. So this is where new keratinocytes are born through cellular division.
Got it.
And from the exact moment they're generated, they get pushed upward by the newer cells continuously forming beneath them.
So they're essentially on a conveyor belt moving toward the surface.
Pretty much, yeah.
Do they stay the same as they get pushed away from that food source?
No, they undergo a pretty radical transformation. As they're forced upward through the next layers, the stratum spinosum and the stratum granulosum, they get further and further from their nutrient supply.
Because they're leaving the blood supply behind.
Right. So to survive as long as possible and to sort of prepare for their ultimate function, they start frantically manufacturing a tough protein called keratin, along with various lipids.
Just packing themselves with it.
Exactly. And eventually, the distance from the blood supply just becomes too great. The cells die. By the time they reach the absolute outermost layer, the stratum corneum, they are fully dead.
Wait, so the part of my arm I'm looking at right now, the surface I can actually touch, is completely dead.
Entirely. The stratum corneum is basically a microscopic graveyard.
That's slightly terrifying.
It consists of about 15 to 30 layers of these dead, flattened, keratin-packed cells, which we call corneocytes.
Okay.
Their only remaining purpose at that point is to provide a physical, overlapping shield for the living tissue underneath, and eventually they just fall off. The technical clinical term for this shedding is desquamation.
Which actually brings up a very weird misconception I remember hearing as a kid.
Oh!
Yeah, I was told that humans shed their skin all at once, peeling off in these invisible microscopic sheets. Kind of similar to a snake molting?
Oh, yeah, that is a wildly popular myth. It was likely born from people misunderstanding how sunburns peel.
Ah, that makes sense.
But in reality, human desquamation is a completely continuous, disorganized cellular process. You are shedding roughly a layer's worth of individual microscopic dead cells constantly, every single minute of the day.
So it's not a sheet at all?
No, it is an invisible, ongoing snowstorm of dead material, rather than some synchronized molt.
A snowstorm of dead material. Beautiful. You know, in the skincare world, you constantly see marketing campaigns promising to optimize your 28-day skin cycle, right?
Yeah.
Treating that timeline like it's a law of physics.
Yes, you see that everywhere.
Is that 28-day journey from birth in the basal layer to falling off in the snowstorm an actual biological constant?
Not at all. Marketing departments love clean, predictable numbers, but biology is notoriously messy.
As always.
Right. That 28-day figure is really just a statistical average pulled from older mid-century studies. The actual turnover rate is heavily dictated by age, genetics, overall health.
So it fluctuates.
A lot.
Oh.
For a healthy 20-something, the conveyor belt might run at 28 days, but as a person ages, particularly passing 50, cellular metabolism slows down. That journey might take 40 or 50 days.
Wow.
And the turnover rate even varies depending on which part of your body you're examining.
So the epidermis isn't just a static wall, it's a highly active manufacturing plant. But I know it doesn't just make dead cells, right? It also interacts with the environment, specifically the sun.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is the sheer biochemistry happening deep down in that stratum basal layer.
The nursery layer.
Right. We tend to think of sunlight as something that simply hits us, but your skin actively uses it as an ingredient.
Like a recipe.
Yeah. When UVB radiation from the sun penetrates the epidermis, it strikes a specific cholesterol derivative floating in your skin cells. The raw energy from that UV radiation literally breaks chemical bonds, converting that cholesterol into pre-vitamin D3.
Wait, I always thought the sun sort of, I don't know, beamed vitamin D into our bodies. But you're saying the sun just provides the spark, and our skin uses its own cholesterol to build it from scratch.
Precisely the mechanism. The skin manufactures the precursor, which is then shipped off to the liver and kidneys to be refined into active vitamin D.
That's incredible.
It really is. This single localized reaction in the epidermis is incredibly vital. It's the core reason why widespread vitamin D deficiency became a massive public health issue when human populations shifted from agrarian outdoor lifestyles to indoor office-based routines.
Because we stopped going outside.
Exactly. We physically removed the catalyst required for that epidermal factory to run.
But, you know, dealing with the sun is a really complicated cultural issue, too.
Yeah.
Like, we needed to run that chemical reaction, but our society also has this deep obsession with the healthy glow of a suntan.
Oh, yeah. The concept of the healthy glow represents a fascinating collision between cultural trends and hard dermatological evidence.
How did it even start?
Well, historically, having pale, untouched skin was a major status symbol. It visually signaled that you were wealthy enough to avoid manual labor in the sun.
Right, you weren't a farmer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the 1920s, fashion icon Coco Chanel notoriously returned from a Mediterranean cruise with a severe sunburn that faded into a deep tan.
Oh, wow. So it literally traces back to Coco Chanel.
Mostly, yeah. Almost overnight, the cultural signaling flipped. Tan skin became a symbol of the leisure class. It proved you had the disposable income to vacation on a beach.
And the tanning and cosmetics industries just capitalized on that shift. But biologically speaking, what is actually happening to the skin when it darkens like that?
Well, the biological reality is actually pretty grim. A tan is absolutely not a sign of health. It is visible evidence of UV-induced DNA damage.
DNA damage.
Yes. When UV radiation penetrates those keratinocytes we talked about, it aggressively strikes the DNA coiled inside the cells, causing structural lesions.
Yikes.
Right. And sensing this genetic injury, the skin triggers an emergency defense mechanism. It commands specialized cells called melanocytes to mass-produce melanin, which is a dark pigment.
Okay, so that's the tan.
Yes. This pigment is then distributed like tiny umbrellas over the DNA of surrounding cells to absorb the radiation and prevent further destruction.
So the darkening of the skin is essentially the body throwing up blast shields after a bomb has already gone off.
That captures the urgency perfectly. It is a desperate trauma response.
Wow.
The cumulative burden of this DNA damage over years is the primary driver behind premature aging of the skin, the breakdown of structural proteins, and, most dangerously, the mutation of cells into skin cancers like melanoma.
Which is terrifying.
It is. The cognitive dissonance of marketing tanning beds as giving a healthy base tan was so egregious that in 2009, the World Health Organization officially classified UV-emitting tanning devices as a Group 1 carcinogen.
Just to put that into perspective for you listening, Group 1 is the exact same definitive cancer-causing category as plutonium and tobacco smoke.
Exactly.
That is a massive paradigm shift from the whole healthy glow marketing.
A completely necessary shift, though, based purely on the mechanisms of cellular injury.
So if the epidermis is constantly taking this kind of damage, turning over dead cells and running all these chemical reactions, it must require an incredible amount of underlying support. Where does the physical strength and the nutrient supply come from if the epidermis doesn't have any blood vessels?
For that, you have to travel one layer deeper. You cross the basement membrane into the engine room of the integumentary system. The dermis.
The dermis, okay.
Yeah, if the epidermis is the sacrificial brick wall facing the weather, the dermis is the living vascular scaffolding holding the entire structure together. It's composed of dense connective tissue and is generally split into two zones.
Okay, let's start with a deeper zone because I assume that's where the heavy lifting happens.
Yes, the bottom portion is called the reticular dermis. It's thick and heavily reinforced with a chaotic interwoven mesh of collagen and elastin fibers.
Collagen and elastin, we hear those a lot in skincare.
Exactly. Collagen provides immense tensile strength, preventing your skin from ripping when you scrape it, while elastin allows the skin to stretch over your joints and snap back into place.
It kind of acts like a biological bungee cord system.
That's exactly it. And along with being a structural foundation, the dermis is sort of the hardware store of the skin.
The hardware store.
Yeah, it houses the intricate network of blood vessels that feed the epidermis above it. It contains your sweat glands, the sebaceous glands that pump out oil to lubricate the surface, and the deep roots of your hair follicles.
So it's packed with machinery.
Very packed. And crucially, it's also the central hub for your nervous system's interaction with the outside world.
Now, this is something I really want to understand. If the surface layer of my skin is completely dead, how am I currently feeling the texture of the chair I'm sitting on or the temperature of the room? How does dead tissue transmit sensation?
Well, the short answer is the dead tissue doesn't transmit anything.
It doesn't.
No, it merely transfers the physical pressure down into the living dermis where the actual sensory hardware is waiting.
Oh, I see.
The dermis is packed with specialized nerve endings designed to translate specific mechanical forces into electrical signals your brain can understand. For example, you have structures called Meissner's corpuscles sitting very high up in the dermis, incredibly concentrated in your fingertips.
Okay.
They are shaped to detect highly sensitive, light touch.
So they pick up all the delicate stuff. What about a heavy impact?
For that, deeper down in the dermis, you find Pacinian corpuscles. These are larger, almost onion-like structures designed to compress only under deep pressure and high-frequency vibration.
Onion-like, wow.
Yeah. You also have Ruffini endings, which are stretched longitudinally to detect when the skin itself is being pulled or torqued. And scattered everywhere are free nerve endings, which act as the raw alarm system for pain and temperature extremes.
The engineering there is just incredible. The hardware is hidden below a dead shield, just waiting for the shield to get pushed.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned the Meissner's corpuscles sit very high up in the dermis. How does that upper edge connect to the epidermis? Like, is it just a flat line where the two layers meet?
Not at all, and that connection is actually vital. The upper zone of the dermis is called the papillary dermis. And instead of a flat boundary, it pushes upward in these microscopic, finger-like projections called dermal papillae.
Finger-like projections.
Yeah, they interlock with downward projections from the epidermis. It looks remarkably like the ridges on a piece of corrugated cardboard.
Oh, that makes sense.
This increases the surface area for a tighter structural bond and better nutrient transfer between the layers.
Wait, microscopic ridges pushing upward. Is that where fingerprints come from?
It is. We culturally treat fingerprints as a surface feature, something existing purely on the epidermis. But the visible ridge pattern on your thumb is actually a direct outward manifestation of the papillary dermis underneath.
So it's coming from underneath.
Yes, the dead cells on the surface are just taking the shape of the living dermal mold below.
But if fingerprints are biological structures, how are they formed? I've always wondered how identical twins who share the exact same genetic blueprint can have entirely different fingerprints. If DNA dictates how the body is built, shouldn't their dermal papillae be identical?
This raises an important question about how our biology is influenced by the physical world, even before we're born.
How so?
Well, genetics only provide the initial rough template for fingerprint formation. The actual permanent ridges take shape in the womb, roughly between weeks 10 and 24 of gestation, and their final design is dictated by fluid dynamics.
Fluid dynamics, like the amniotic fluid.
Yes. As the fetus grows, it's floating and moving in the amniotic fluid, touching the walls of the uterus. The chaotic micromechanical pressures of that fluid pushing against the developing skin, combined with the varying growth rates of the fingers themselves, physically buckle and fold the dermal layers into unique patterns.
It's literally shaped by its environment.
Precisely. Because the fluid environment is utterly chaotic, it is physically impossible for two fetuses, even identical twins, sharing the same DNA, to experience the exact same mechanical forces.
Right.
Therefore, their dermal ridges buckle in completely distinct ways.
That chaotic physics is why fingerprints have been considered the absolute infallible gold standard for forensic science for over a century. They're a one-of-a-kind permanent stamp of identity.
Yes, they are.
But if human biology is that flawless, why do we hear about fingerprint analysis failing in criminal cases?
Well, the failure doesn't lie in the biology. It lies in human psychology.
Oh, interesting.
For decades, courts treated fingerprint matching as an objective, infallible science. But crime scene prints are rarely perfect, rolled ink stamps. They're usually partial, distorted, overlapping smudges.
Right, they're messy.
Very. So the process of matching that smudge to a suspect relies entirely on a human examiner visually identifying patterns. And human beings are incredibly susceptible to cognitive bias.
Meaning, if they expect to find a match, their brain sort of tricks them into seeing one.
Exactly the issue. The landmark case that really brought this to light was the 2004 Madrid train bombing investigation.
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, investigators found a partial, low-quality fingerprint on a plastic bag containing detonators. The FBI's elite fingerprint unit analyzed the smudge and declared a 100% conclusive match to an American attorney named Brandon Mayfield.
100% match.
Based on this supposedly infallible dermal ridge pattern, Mayfield was arrested.
But he had never even been to Spain, right? He had nothing to do with it.
He was completely innocent. Spanish authorities eventually matched the print to the actual perpetrator, who was an Algerian national.
Wow. So the FBI just got it totally wrong.
They had fallen victim to confirmation bias. They found a few similarities between the smudge and Mayfield's file, and their brains subjectively filled in the rest to confirm their suspicion.
That is wild.
It was a massive wake-up call for the legal system. It proved that while your unique dermal papillae are an incredible biological feat, relying on human eyes to decipher a partial smudge of those papillae is a highly flawed science.
That is just a terrifying intersection of biology and human error. Now, moving downward again, we've covered the dead epidermal shield and the living dermal engine room. But where does the skin actually stop? Like, what is beneath the dermis?
Well, you have reached the boundary problem of the integumentary system. Below the dermis lies the hypodermis, also known as the subcutaneous layer.
Okay, the hypodermis.
Yes. And whether or not this layer officially counts as skin is a subject of intense debate in the medical community.
Wait, why is it up for debate? Isn't it just anatomy?
It depends on whether you view the body structurally or functionally. Strict anatomy texts often exclude the hypodermis. They classify it merely as an underlying layer of loose connective tissue and adipose fat that basically just serves to anchor the skin to the muscle and bone below.
Okay, but I'm guessing physiologists see it differently.
They do, yeah. Physiology curricula often include the hypodermis as a third functional layer of the skin. They argue that the skin's critical duties, specifically thermoregulation, keeping you warm, and acting as a shock absorber against trauma, are physically impossible to perform without that integrated layer of fat.
That makes total sense.
Plus, the blood vessels and nerves from the dermis weave directly down into it, making it highly connected.
Including the hypodermis must completely change the math on how thick the skin actually is then.
Drastically. If you only measure the epidermis and dermis, human skin is remarkably thin. It ranges from about 0.5 millimeter on your eyelids to maybe 4 or 5 millimeters on the soles of your feet.
Right.
But if you include the hypodermis, the total thickness in areas designed for fat storage, like the abdomen or the thighs, can easily exceed a full centimeter.
Wow. You know, this blurring of boundaries also makes me think about hair and nails. We tend to view them as these entirely separate accessories that just happen to plug into the skin, like pegs in a board.
Yeah, that's a very understandable misconception, but it's anatomically incorrect. Hair and nails are not separate add-on structures.
There.
No, they are specialized, highly keratinized derivatives of the epidermis itself.
Oh, wow.
The hair follicles buried deep in your dermis and the nail matrices under your cuticles are structurally continuous with your skin tissue. They're classified as skin appendages, completely integrated into the organ.
One area of clinical medicine where understanding these distinct layers becomes absolutely critical, and often a matter of life and death, is the treatment of severe burns. The way doctors classify burns maps perfectly onto this three-layer architecture.
Yes, it is a direct clinical application of the anatomical model. A first-degree burn, such as a standard non-blistering sunburn, is superficial. The damage is isolated entirely within the epidermis.
So it's just hitting the dead cells in that basal layer.
Exactly. A second-degree burn is much more severe. The heat energy breaches the basement membrane and damages the living dermis below.
Ouch.
Right. This structural failure causes fluid to leak and separate the layers, which is precisely why second-degree burns blister.
And a third-degree burn. Does that just obliterate everything?
A third-degree burn completely destroys both the epidermis and the full thickness of the dermis, often charring down into the hypodermis. It basically vaporizes the blood vessels, the sweat glands, and the hair follicles.
You know, I have heard medics say that sometimes, counterintuitively, severe third-degree burns are less painful for the patient than second-degree burns. How is that mechanically possible?
Because of the total destruction of that sensory hardware we discussed earlier.
Oh, right.
Yeah. The intense heat of a third-degree burn physically incinerates all of the free nerve endings, the Meissners and the Pacinian corpuscles housed in the dermis. The local alarm system has been permanently melted away.
That is awful.
So the surrounding second-degree burn areas will be agonizing. But the exact site of the third-degree burn lacks the physical equipment to transmit pain signals to the brain.
That makes horrifying anatomical sense.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of the skin's relationship with the rest of the body, I want to bring up a huge pop culture myth.
Oh, I'm ready?
You see this in spy movies all the time.
Yeah.
The villain covers someone's entire body in tight latex or paints them entirely in gold paint, and the victim suffocates because the skin can't breathe. Is the skin actually inhaling oxygen to keep us alive?
The skin breathes myth is incredibly persistent, largely thanks to Hollywood. Human skin does absorb a microscopic, biologically negligible fraction of oxygen directly from the air for its own uppermost cells, but you absolutely do not breathe through your skin.
So it's a total myth.
Completely. Your lungs handle the systemic oxygenation of your blood. If a person covered in non-porous body paint were to collapse and die, it is physiologically impossible for oxygen deprivation through the skin to be the cause.
But people have gotten severely ill from full body paint. If they aren't suffocating, what is the actual mechanism making them sick?
The real life-threatening danger is a massive failure of thermoregulation. Your skin is the primary radiator for your core temperature.
Okay.
When your internal temperature rises, your blood vessels undergo vasodilation. They expand, rushing hot blood to the surface of the dermis to radiate heat outward. Simultaneously, your eccrine glands pump out sweat, which cools the blood via evaporation.
So if you coat the entire body in latex or non-porous paint.
You seal the system. You physically block the sweat from evaporating and trap the radiated heat. The person wouldn't suffocate. They would suffer a catastrophic spike in core temperature, leading to heat exhaustion and eventually heat stroke.
Wow.
The myth gets the danger right, but the physiological mechanism is totally backward.
It is wild how long it takes for our collective understanding to catch up with the biology.
Yeah.
For most of human history, even physicians didn't really grasp what the skin was doing. Like prior to the 17th century, the medical consensus was basically that the skin was just a passive, inert sac holding the important wet stuff inside.
Basically, yeah. It was recognized as a barrier that needed to be closed when wounded, but no one viewed it as a complex, active organ with its own internal architecture.
Right.
The paradigm shift required a technological leap, the microscope. In the 1660s, an Italian physician named Marcello Malpighi began putting thin slices of tissue under early compound microscopes. He was the first human to visually separate the epidermis from the dermis, and he identified that deep dividing layer where the cells are born, the stratum basal.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Even as microscopes improved, scientists were still severely limited by how they prepared the samples.
Yes.
In 1868, a 21-year-old German medical student named Paul Langerhans made a massive discovery, but he got the interpretation completely wrong. He found these strange, star-shaped cells hiding in the epidermis, but he published a paper claiming they were nerve cells.
Yes, the Langerhans cells.
How does a trained medical observer confuse a crucial part of the immune system for a neuron?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of scientific history, it perfectly illustrates how our observational technology dictates our scientific reality.
What do you mean?
In the 19th century, you couldn't just look at clear microscopic tissue. You had to dye it to actually see the structures. Langerhans was using a cutting-edge technique called silver staining. The heavy metal bound to these new cells, highlighting their long, branching dendritic arms against the lighter background.
And neurons also have branching arms, right?
Precisely. At that time, the only cells in the human body known to possess that star-like branching architecture were nervous system cells. The chemical stain physically couldn't distinguish between the proteins of a nerve cell and this mystery cell.
Oh, I see.
So, based on the shape revealed by his technology, Langerhans logically deduced they were sensory receptors.
And the scientific community just accepted that misclassification.
For nearly a century. It wasn't until the 1960s and 70s, when modern immunology and electron microscopes emerged, that researchers finally realized these Langerhans cells had nothing to do with sensation.
They're your immune cells.
Yes,
Yeah.
they were actually powerful immune sentinels. Their long arms weren't feeling for touch. They were physically reaching out between the keratinocytes to grab invading bacteria and present them to the immune system.
Wow, that's amazing.
It was a massive revelation that proved the skin was an active, aggressive immune organ, not just a passive wall.
That historical journey from viewing the skin as a passive wall to an active, hostile environment for invaders, it sets up perfectly the most recent and arguably most disruptive paradigm shift in dermatology.
The microbiome.
Exactly. For my entire childhood, the goal of soap and skincare was sterilization. Kill 99.9% of bacteria. Treat the skin like a sterile fortress.
Oh, absolutely. That was the defining doctrine of 20th century hygiene. Eradicate all microbes on the surface.
Yeah.
But the advent of cheap, rapid genomic sequencing in the early 2000s, spearheaded by the NIH's Human Microbiome Project, completely shattered that doctrine.
Because they found out what was really there?
Right. By sequencing the DNA found on healthy human skin, researchers discovered that our surface is not supposed to be a sterile fortress at all.
It's heavily populated.
Extremely. It is a bustling, incredibly dense ecosystem of thousands of species of bacteria, fungi, and viruses. And the crucial discovery was that these microbes aren't just freeloading, they are actively working.
Working how?
They break down the natural oils in your skin to create a slightly acidic environment that repels dangerous pathogens. They take up physical space, outcompeting harmful bacteria for real estate. They even communicate with those Langerhans immune cells we just talked about, training them on what to attack and what to ignore.
So by constantly trying to scrub ourselves totally sterile, We were essentially nuking our own frontline defense system,
Basically, yes.
which entirely explains why the cosmetics aisle is now totally flooded with microbiome-friendly and probiotic skincare lines.
Exactly. We finally realized that the healthiest version of our largest organ is a deeply managed, thriving ecosystem, not some barren wasteland.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The next time you look down at your hands, try to remember that you aren't just looking at a flat piece of wrapping paper, keeping your insides from spilling out.
Far from it.
You are looking at a constantly dying and regenerating cellular conveyor belt. You are looking at a chemical plant converting raw solar radiation into essential hormones. You're looking at a microscopic forensic map permanently buckled and stamped by the chaotic mechanical pressures of the womb you grew in.
Yeah.
And you are observing a bustling, invisible immune ecosystem that works tirelessly to keep you alive. The largest organ, give or take, a lunging, is vastly more complex than it appears on the surface.
It truly is a marvel of biological engineering. And I will leave you with a final thought to ponder, something that captures the beautiful paradox of the integumentary system.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
We established today that your fingerprints are utterly unique to you, permanently forged by the physical pressures of the womb before you took a single breath. They are the ultimate biological signature of permanent, unchanging identity. Yet, the epidermal canvas they are printed on is a relentless, dying conveyor belt, completely erasing and replacing its cellular makeup every month or so. It is a fascinating contradiction to carry with you. The biological signature we rely on most to prove our permanent identity is displayed on an organ that never stops erasing itself.
A permanent defining stamp on a vanishing canvas. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the obvious, and we'll catch you next time.